It's Friday, 4:03 here in Berlin, and I'm sorry that we are a little bit late. I wasn't sure if that was actually working, so I had to open LinkedIn and YouTube to see if the stream was working. It is working. So hi, my name is Suereth. I'm a software engineer, and this is Telemetry Drops, and I've been doing Telemetry Drops for almost a year now. Time flies. And in this channel, we talk for half an hour, 45 minutes or so, about something around OpenTelemetry or observability. And for the past few weeks, I've been receiving, or for the past few editions, I've been receiving people that I trust, that I like, and people that I know from the community. So we talked to Antoine already about the isolation forest processor. We talked with Dan Blanco last week about the blueprints, hotel blueprints, a proposal that is there. We also talked with Jason Plum from Splunk and Bruno Batista from Red Hat about the Java SDK performance and how the benchmarks work there and what are the things that we should pay attention to and so on. Those were very nice conversations. And today I have another very special guest, and we're talking about a topic that I think should be discussed more often. And quite a lot of people are extremely interested about this topic, and they don't know how to get started. So let's start changing that. But before doing that, I wanted to make a few comments. The first one is we had Hotel Unplugged this weekend, or actually on Monday, so it wasn't technically a weekend, I suppose, in Brussels. And we had such a great event. So we had 100+ people there joining live in Brussels. And we did an unconference, meaning we decided at the very beginning what would be the topics to discuss. And the topics were then exposed on whiteboards, and people would vote on them. And we would do breakout sessions. We would talk about those problems or those topics in smaller groups. One of those groups was focused on bad telemetry and Weaver, so very relevant for the conversation here. We had a full room, so a lot of people are interested in bad telemetry and Weaver, which I think it is one of the topics that is close to me, but it was surprising to me to see that so many people were also paying attention, or are also paying attention to that. This is also not only the only hot topic within OpenTelemetry. The other hot topic is stability of OpenTelemetry, and among, of course, metrics, and we talked about OCB as well, and so many other things. So if you have an Hotel Unplugged happening close to you, I do recommend you signing up and going there in a few weeks' time. So I think in almost 2 months, we are having KubeCon in Amsterdam as well. So if you are close to Amsterdam, and if you don't have a ticket yet, you should worry. You should hurry up and get your tickets for KubeCon Amsterdam. With that said, oh yeah, and something else as well. In 1 month, so beginning of March, I'll be in Brazil for an event, and on the 3rd of March, I'm doing something that I typically do only here in Berlin. So here in Berlin, every couple of months, I do a no-tell night, and we have one next week. And in the beginning of March, I'm going to do a hotel afternoon, tarde de OpenTelemetry in São Paulo. So if you are in São Paulo or if you are in Brazil, block in your schedules. So 3rd of March, we are going to have a hotel afternoon in São Paulo. And with that said, I'd like to invite Josh here to the conversation. Hey, Josh.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. How about you?
Good, yeah.
So I think everybody knows you already, but who's Josh, for those who don't?
Yeah, I'm Josh Suereth. I'm on the technical committee for OpenTelemetry, and I drive various projects. I've done a few random things throughout the project. Like I worked in the Java SDK. I did a lot with the metrics definition and development, and recently have been driving kind of semantic conventions and OpenTelemetry strategy there, trying to make it so all of that is successful. And I think today we're going to talk about the big kind of underlying technology we use for semantic conventions and how we're going to open up for everyone and make it generally available as just a thing that makes observability better.
Cool, nice. Java SDK, so you mentioned Java. From going back a little bit even more, OpenTelemetry was made up of two communities. Which one did you come from?
Wait, sorry, can you say that again?
Oh yeah, so OpenTelemetry is made up of two, or was originated from two communities, right? So OpenTelemetry, from which side of the house?
So yeah, this is fun. So open telemetry comes from open census and open tracing.
Right.
I am neither.
Oh, I thought you came from Open Census. Okay.
No,
Okay,
I
fine, interesting.
inherited open census. So
Aha,
I actually joined. So I work with Google, and I joined open telemetry purposely for open telemetry.
nice,
And
nice.
in the process of like working with open telemetry and things, I inherited the open census foundation. And so I had to build up a lot of open census experience and like meet all the people who are responsible for it, figure out the design and all that sort of thing. But I would say I'm more open telemetry native than I am either of the originals. Yeah.
Nice, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
And then you talked about semantic conventions. What are the challenges there? Like, what are the things that why is it hard to establish those those patterns as standards?
Yeah. So I think we'll go through a set of what the challenges are, and you'll have to remind me if I repeat myself. But I think foundationally, challenge number one is a people challenge, right? Like we are trying to make a standard. A standard is an agreement across a set of people that this is what it should look like. And getting a lot of people in the same room to agree to something can be difficult. Um, as you know. So we're trying to actually find a way to make sure that when we define these standards, having a consistent set of criteria so that it's not about opinion as much as possible, right? And that we can align on values, if you will. So this would be cool if you're going to define semantic conventions for like HTTP. We focused on what are the sorry if I use producty terms like googly things, but customer user journeys. Like, what are the things that you will do with this data? Um, the hard part of observability is we need to handle unknown unknowns. Like when all else hits the fan and it's not something you expect, you still have to debug. So you still need like enough observability for that. And that's where opinion comes in a lot. But for a lot of these things, it's cool. When you have to debate this attribute versus that attribute, we ask, well, what kind of a thing are people going to do with this? Are they going to join the data? Do they need an alert that looks like this? Are they going to make graphs that look like that? What's a kind of problem that you can solve here to optimize for? And when the problem is something we think maybe 10 people in the world will care about, maybe that's something that we'll outline but have it as an optional thing, and it's not as important as something that we think every single person who runs an HTTP server needs, and we try to focus more on that latter side.
Can we go back a little bit and think like why do we actually need those semantic conventions? Like why is it important? What is the problem that we are solving? Like what are the things that we had in the past or that people still have when using other tools that we are trying to avoid with semantic conventions?
Yes. Yeah, though this gets into some of the other problems we can talk about. But I think the main issue previously was it was a bit of Wild West and then lock-in. And so not only you actually had vendor lock-in even in open source, right? Of I'm using a dashboard and a set of alerts designed for my system. And if I were to change where I send my data, it won't work. Or if I am going to look at a system that stores my traces, and I look at a system that stores my metrics, and I look at a system that stores my logs, I have to perform completely different queries between the three. And so if I try to make a filter in my dashboard to look at all three at the same time, I can't. Like fundamentally, if you think of the start of it, it's can I put these three things on a dashboard and filter at the same time would be the beginning. And then we've just kind of compounded from there. So that's like step one. Step two is actually that we're trying to address is stability of these things. I think if you look at the definition of observability, I think I talked about this at KubeCon like a while back, but The definition of observability is taking the things, the outputs of your system, and using them to determine if the behavior is correct. And if we think about like the input and output of your system, normally you consider that your API, and you might have a high bar of like what stability means there. But as an industry, we did not have that bar for what we would produce for observability. We would just sort of slap stuff out. We would change it. We'd add labels all the time and break things. And so actually having a consistent observable system that, you know, if I define an alert today, it will work tomorrow. We were breaking, and we were breaking in like odd ways. And so, you know, for example, Prometheus did us a great service, I think, with its big open source ecosystem, and had de facto conventions for like node exporter, right? If node exporter changes the definition of a metric, thousands of people will complain. But if random exporter that one person owns that I rely on changes the definition of metric, maybe that person doesn't have enough time to like keep that stable or like wants to fix it. And I just get broken dashboards, right? So one of the things that we also want to solve with semantic conventions is starting to treat the observability as like an API and give it that level of software rigor that you expect from like the API of your system from a library, you know? At least we should be able to use the same kind of maturity levels that we have. So in OpenTelemetry, you know, we have the, you go from alpha to beta to stable, you have major releases where we allow breaking changes. We want to apply that same principle to the actual data that you are observing. Because if we keep changing these schemas, if we keep moving things around, all we end up with is a broken ecosystem, or people locked into, I use library X and I can't move to library Y, even though library Y might be better. You know?
Yeah, and I think, so you touched on one topic with Prometheus there, and one thing that I saw just last week was I saw HTTP metrics coming from a Python application using a Python client, and another client also in the Prometheus ecosystem, but that was generating a different metric name for HTTP as well. And I think this is one of the things that we are trying to achieve with semantic conventions, and that is we establish the patterns or the conventions at the top level or as a separate entity within OpenTelemetry, and then all of the different pieces of OpenTelemetry that pertain that specific layer, like HTTP clients or HTTP servers, they should talk the same language, right? So I think this is an aspect of OpenTelemetry that is undervalued or that people not always get. That is not only about OTLP. It's also about the idioms, like the language that is spoken within the protocol.
Yeah. That's you nailed it in the head there. Like it's the reason to have an HTTP semantic convention is so that when we have an HTTP server that we need to observe generically, if I am using, I'm going to use a Java example for now, right? Like let's say I start off and I'm using Spring, and I decide, or maybe a better option, I use OK HTTP, or I have a prototype and I'm using the built-in JDK HTTP server. But then I re-architect my system and I move to OK HTTP. Do I get different metrics and spans? Like, does all the infrastructure I set up to observe that system just completely break? Or do I have a set of things that are actually I know will be stable, and maybe some things change, right? Because there will be differences. You know, Spring HTTP, OK HTTP, the built-in JDK HTTP server, they're different. There's different things you will need to care about. But those key things that I rely on, like just basic, you know, DevOps stuff, does that still work? The answer to that second question should be yes. That's the goal, you know?
Yeah. And I think perhaps an extra nuance there is if I have an internal team that handles observability in general, they can provide all of the development teams with pre-built dashboards, like for web metrics. Doesn't matter, not caring about what is the tech stack that they're using. Right? So they can just reuse because there is a common language that is being spoken independent of the framework, the language, and so on. All right, so let's get closer then to Weaver now. What are the challenges in creating and managing semantic conventions that led to the idea to start Weaver.
Yeah. Well, first, I'll talk a little bit briefly about what Weaver is, and then we'll talk about the challenges that led to us defining it. So the initial challenge we had was just we need a way to define the shape of a metric, of a span, of a log, or a resource, or now we call them entities. We need to define the shape of it and like make sure that that shape is stable and usable for people. Describe what it is and what it means. And that definition is something where we initially started with a bunch of Python scripts and a YAML file. And the YAML file just evolved to whatever the Python handled. But as we were going through, we were running into problems where we wanted to be like, okay, can we require, for example, that every single span, you know which attributes are used in sampling or not? Because actually the way you write instrumentation, you need to provide them earlier in the instrumentation cycle if they are involved in sampling. So we wanted to add that. And then we wanted, we started doing stability rules and software release lifecycle of, okay, can I say that this is ready for release, but this is still experimental? And spans have attributes, right? Well, attributes can be marked as the definition of this attribute will never change from now on. And they have a life cycle. Spans have a life cycle, and it started getting like unwieldy. Additionally, we have a set of things we do in OpenTelemetry where we hold ourselves to a pretty high standard. But if you as a user of OpenTelemetry don't need the same high standard, because you can make decisions that simplify your life, where OpenTelemetry needs to allow anyone to make those same simplifications. So we have, if I'm a company, for example, I don't have to worry about namespacing metrics for any possible company that uses me. I am that company. I can just call my metric whatever the heck I want, and I know that I have access to every possible thing. In OpenTelemetry, we don't know what else in the world is out there, and we want to leave room for people to define their own data, to define new things. And so we have a more strict policy around how you name things to prevent OpenTelemetry from causing conflicts, right? So those policies around naming, around conventions, there's a difference between if you work in OpenTelemetry versus if you're using it, what's allowed, right? The next kind of challenge we had was just actually making sure things don't break from version to version. So I define a span. I have an attribute called X. I want to rename it. How do I tell people that attribute now has a new name? Or how do I make sure that I don't do that as a breaking change, right? How do I make sure that I prevent people from accidentally dropping things in this definition format? So we developed this tool called Weaver, which takes those YAML files, and we're trying to create a very human-readable way of describing your data. We're actually working on what we call our V2 YAML syntax, based on what we learned in semantic conventions, where you literally say, I have a metric, here's its name, here's a brief description of it, here's a set of attributes I expect. In those attributes, I can say, cool, this attribute has this meaning, and we have open extension of these things, which I'll get to in a second. But I can say, here's the meaning of the attribute, here's the, it's an enum, it has these possible 5 values, that sort of thing. And it describes the shape of the data. Foundationally, that's the thing we expect OpenTelemetry semantic conventions and people to do. Think of it like gRPC or Thrift, that kind of thing for telemetry data. Instead of defining like, here's my RPC endpoint, even MCP, you can think of it like, here's my tool calls, right? Here's a definition of the 5 things I will provide. Doing that for your observability. Sorry, my camera just died. Not sure why. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, yes.
Okay. I'll get it fixed as I talk here. Okay. So anyway, you should be able to define the data that you have, and that's the first step. But then there's a set of things you need to do from that, right? In OpenTelemetry, our next challenge is we were defining all of these constants around this attribute means this. And we want that to be the same attribute in Python, in Java, in Go, in Rust, in C++, all of those things. We also want it to be the same constant if you're using, again, to my Java example, the OKHTTP library or the Java SDK HTTP library or Spring. So we actually have the ability to do code generation, right? We actually will generate the code. It started with generating constants, and we're going a bit deeper now and giving you full access to generate whatever you need. But yeah, like the ability to generate that code to kind of solve this problem of, can I consistently use this definition in different places? And then we kept going. So the next set of things, right? We have the ability to enforce policies on this data. So I can define, I'm actually working on this now. There's a repository in OpenTelemetry called OpenTelemetry Weaver packages. And this is an open set of extendable things you can use in your own version of Weaver. And we're extracting the semantic convention rules into it. So the first set we have is a set of backwards compatibility policies. So it's a set of policies where if I use them, I can guarantee that from version A to version B, I have not caused a breaking change that will break dashboards, break alerts, break general queries and usage patterns of telemetry data, right? But those policies can be things like naming conventions of your company. Inside, we actually do that for OpenTelemetry. We have a naming convention policy that will make sure you're not breaking some of our rules. We have stability policies, as I mentioned, and other things. That packages thing, the next thing we're going to work on is getting the code gen from semantic conventions into there. But this is like generating the documentation. The OpenTelemetry IO website is completely, well, not completely, but mostly auto-generated from these definition files, where we automatically generate documentation for what the conventions are. The next thing we have now is what we call live check, which is where we can enforce that the data you're creating abides by the conventions. So you can actually fire OpenTelemetry protocol into Weaver. You can point it at the definition of the data you want it to be created, and it will give you errors and warnings if it doesn't match. And so that's a way that you can kind of ensure you're compliant with your expectations. So that's actually getting built out. I should say that was built out. That was like the last year, kind of a huge amount of effort into getting a lot of really cool stuff there. Just recently, we have a prototype MCP server in the latest release of Weaver, where you can even use MCP to fire example telemetry out of your database into Weaver and check using live check to see if it's compliant, for example.
So it's a lot. Like I get
Yes.
that Weaver is a lot of components, and I think knowing a little bit of Weaver, I think the one way that I would summarize, and you tell me if I'm getting this right, the one way that I would summarize is Weaver is a tool or a set of tools that give me that help me with the governance of my telemetry. Right? So I think first and foremost, Weaver allows me to define what is expected from my applications in terms of telemetry, like what are the things that I'm emitting, and then it gives me tools to ensure that telemetry is compliant with the specs. Is that basically it?
Yeah, that is its core purpose. Yeah. We have been expanding it with convenience things as well. Like there's a Weaver emit command where if somebody makes the definition, you can generate fake data and send it to somebody to create dashboards. At the same time, you're sending the definitions to your developers to go instrument using the code, for example. And recently, the Prometheus ecosystem had this really cool idea of infer. So this is where you can take existing instrumentation, fire OpenTelemetry data into Weaver, and it will give you the definitions that it discovered. So you don't have to write them to begin with. You can just record what you're already doing, and then you can bring it into this compliance world. But overall, you're absolutely right. The idea is there's a set of rigor and process around the observability signals I'm generating. And Weaver is your Swiss Army knife to kind of enforce those and keep that, that part of your observability story healthy.
Okay, so I guess one question that I would have to make it clear for the external audience, for people out there, is who's the audience? Like, who should be looking into Weaver? To whom is Weaver important?
Yep. That's great question. We have a set, as most things in OpenTelemetry. There's not one audience. So I would argue we have audiences that we're targeting initially in Weaver, and we're expanding as we go. The overall audience is actually folks who own observability for a company. Weaver is targeted at them. I want to set up, systemic observability. That systemic maybe sounds bad, but you get like a platform of observability at my company where I can look at and make sure systems that run in my infrastructure are observable, and I can keep them finely tuned and understand what's going on. Weaver's targeted at you because you can define these rules, this compliance, and you can find ways to enforce this. If you have a staging environment, you can use Weaver to ensure that like the observability you expect is coming out of staging, and issue warnings and send them back to developers. You can use Weaver to give to developers to say, here's the set of instrumentation you need to provide. And then, so that's audience one. Audience two would be observability vendors. If folks are exchanging these definitions of metrics and things, let's talk about Grafana. Let's talk about Splunk, like folks in the OpenTelemetry ecosystem. I can give them the definition of my data, and they can create. They can use this for like charts and things. I hover over an attribute, and the description for what that attribute means can come from the Weaver definition. So it's kind of like a side channel to give us richer information about the data, and it gives us a way to do that without having to send it over the wire, right? So there's that aspect. And then the third audience, which is the one we're targeting immediately, is OpenTelemetry itself. We're trying to get instrumentation stable, compliant, and implemented very rapidly in OpenTelemetry. And we're trying to just improve that process and make it so it doesn't require a human to manually inspect every single line of code, to make sure that we have that and get it more automated.
Got it. So I think we have then one audience would be developers. So developers are consuming the outputs of Weaver, like the code that is generated so that I can instrument my code using those constants. The second audience would be the observability engineers or the people on the central teams that are defining the rules, and then OpenTelemetry contributors themselves. Looking at this second audience, like the observability engineers, if I'm aiming to establish my own internal semantic conventions for my company, what are the steps that I should be taking? Like, can you guide me through how can I get started with Weaver and implement that?
Yeah, we have. So there's an OpenTelemetry Weaver examples repository that actually has some examples there. But I'll describe the basic gist. You create a location where you can define the signals that your company will be producing, right? So we call these registries. If you want your registry to leverage OpenTelemetry semantic conventions, we have a way for you to declare a dependency on it. So you can define your local registry of what your company will produce. You can depend on the pieces of OpenTelemetry you want. And you define these semantics similar to how your company might have a registry of what APIs it's serving. It might have a registry of, like what libraries are available in their APIs, that kind of a thing. The idea is you create the central place where you can write this. Oh yeah, thank you. I should have had the links ready earlier. Then you build out some code generation and or integration test capabilities for your company. So I can use Weaver in an integration test to make sure that every every process which is going to be an HTTP server is generating a consistent set of HTTP metrics. And those metrics have the exact attributes I need as a platform to do my, SRE DevOps stuff. And so you can start wiring that into the integration process right there. And then over time, you can start using the other aspects of Weaver. But initially, I think that's kind of your first venture is getting the definitions down, helping developers like generate the code for this, and then getting the compliance in where we can say, cool, your process is giving me the data I need to do my job, yay or nay. And you'll get a signal from Weaver. You can put it right into whatever release CI/CD pipeline they're using to generate data and go from there. That would be my recommended first start. There are companies using Weaver in this fashion. And so we also have in the CNCF Slack, there's an OTel Weaver channel. And if you wanted to talk to folks who are using Weaver in anger in their companies, that's another good thing to do because, this MCP server in Weaver, for example, agents keep blowing my mind with some of the things people try. And that was a whole discussion that happened in chat that was not even on my radar, 2 weeks ago. And suddenly we have an MCP server that does some really cool stuff. So I think it's, finding other people and asking them, hey, what are you doing? Like, I have a problem around my observability. How are you using this tool? Is it helping you? I think that's actually, you're going to get a lot more value there as well.
Yeah. I think you just touched a question that will be my next question, which is, what is the AI story with Weaver? And I think this is one of those, right? So if you can point your coding agent to a Weaver repository or to the Weaver definitions of your telemetry, you can then suddenly ask, match what I have with the expectations and help me improve it. Or what are the instrumentation gaps that I have in my code? So create the definitions first in Weaver, and then I review, and then I can use the same agent to then implement those gaps, like to close the gaps there.
Yeah, and those are example use cases, and I think over time, there's two things that we need to figure out here. One is, in my mind, a big way to make agents successful is to limit the amount of context they have to make any particular decision, and then help them make large decisions by making lots of good small decisions. And so where Weaver can help is you could say, what is the best way? Help me write a query to get data of X. Weaver has the knowledge of what the attributes mean. And so if I'm trying to figure out how to pinpoint, looking for data, Weaver can be that thing that gives me the descriptions and helps me understand how, what filters, what data is available. Without having to actually search through everything first, I can define what query to issue to start looking for problems. I think it's also good to ask it, like you were saying, where do I not have observability, right? Go look at this set of signals that I'm producing, right? And tie it to some other, thing that tells me what I'm actually having in production, and say, what am I missing? Help me look for other registries, like Weaver registries. Take a look at OpenTelemetry, look at what I did, and tell me, is there something in OpenTelemetry I'm not using that I could? Is there some system that doesn't have any signals attached to it right now? Those are some interesting questions you can start asking. But Weaver's really targeted at the trying to get ahead of, does this server produce signals that let me maintain it in production? Right. And that's where I think the AI will help there in terms of helping you answer that question. And then when you run into problems, asking, okay, if the server has all the signals I need, what's the one I need to look at right now?
This is really cool. You mentioned a few things that Weaver is, like all the tooling around the basic idea of the governance of my own telemetry. What are the things that are ready to be used, and what are the things that we should be waiting a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah. So I think right now the main thing, that's ready to be used, we have a V1 syntax with policies, and if you're willing to put in a lot of work building the infrastructure yourself, which is what our uh, early adopters are doing, like if you want to participate in building some of the foundations, we're ready for you. What I think is coming, and where we're actively building now. I mentioned this Open Telemetry Weaver packages repository. We actually just stood it up last week or Monday. It's pretty hot off the press, but we're building a location for people to share common things that you would do in Weaver. Weaver's designed to be incredibly flexible. The way that we do code generation, if you as a company wanted to use your proprietary libraries and have it generate code against those libraries, you absolutely can. There's nothing stopping you from that. You can take open telemetry semantic conventions and build instrumentation for your proprietary library. Totally fine. It's designed, and the proprietary piece you get to keep internally. However, this public bit, the like reusable parts, we're trying to create an ecosystem where those can be shared. And right now we're reaching out to the open telemetry ecosystem to help us do that. So this would be help me generate Go instrumentation code. Today in open telemetry, we only generate code for semantic conventions from open telemetry. What we're trying to do is take that capability and turn it into generating code for anyone's telemetry. So if you start with the Weaver definition, you get the same code gen capabilities OpenTelemetry uses for instrumentation. So this means, when you're dealing with your company and you're mixing open source and proprietary, cool. Open source, you should get something out of the box. Proprietary, it shouldn't be you get zero. It should be you get something that helps you accelerate and like make this successful and make your solution work.
So what you're telling me is the way that I consume Go today with OpenTelemetry, like if I'm instrumenting my HTTP server, I have those helper functions in Go that I can use to set the values for those semantic conventions. And you're telling me that the future is I'm going to use the same kind of code for my own telemetry, right? So I'm going to have the same kind of helpers there. What are we missing there? So who should come and helping build this foundation?
Right now, the thing that we're missing predominantly is folks who are interested and excited in making efficient. Like, let's talk about Go specifically. Folks who want to take these definitions of metrics and turn it into efficient Go code that will make it easier for people to generate that metric, right? So this is those APIs. Think of it as a layer on top of OpenTelemetry that needs to be efficient, but is dead simple. So instead of, get counter with a string, it is, I want to record the fact that there was a, transaction that happened in my checkout system. And so we know that you want a metric around how many items are in a shopping cart, for example, right? I define that metric. We want a Go library that is about shopping carts, not about open telemetry counters. And we need folks who will help us take these metric definitions and make the Go library, make it fast, make it slim, make it efficient, and make it work across, whatever. That's kind of where we are right now. We are engaging the current language SDK owners because they're the ones who own the symbol generation. But frankly, we're all overloaded in OTel, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of room for folks to come in and just own, I really want to do code gen. Cool. I can own code gen for Rust. I can own code gen for Go. I can own code gen for JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever, and generate this code right now. That's kind of what we're looking for. Yeah, and that'll help us rapidly get this stuff out the door and kind of expand the reach of the ecosystem.
Got it. So, and code gen here, just going back one step, code gen here is, you mentioned the example of Thrift and gRPC before. And I think what you making a parallel here, I think the way that I understand is if I have a gRPC service, I can then have my protobufs, and I can then use a tool that generates Go code from protobuf, and the same is with Weaver. Right, so Weaver is the protobuf in this story here. The YAML files are the proto files, and what we are looking for, what you are looking for right now, or Weaver, is for people to generate the code gens that will take the YAML files and generate the resulting proto clients or proto servers or gRPC servers and clients following these specs. Is that
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we want it to be as simple to make telemetry as it is to use like gRPC or these like definition based API things. So you define I want metric X, and I get Go code that just tells me how to make metric X, and I don't have to care about all the weird complexities of OpenTelemetry anymore. It's literally specific to the thing I want to do.
Mhm. One thing that we talked during OTel Unplugged is how Weaver can help us in fighting bad telemetry.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand a little bit on that? Like, what are the points where Weaver can help me, and which things is perhaps could not be done with Weaver? Like, what are the limitations and what are the capabilities in fighting bad telemetry?
Yeah, yeah. So I will say that one of the most valuable things that Semantic Conventions has produced is a set of documents about how to think about creating telemetry. What is the mindset you go into for defining your data? That is a bit of a human thing. One thing so that is not something Weaver can necessarily do for you is like why should I have metric X? But with semantic conventions, we've been trying to get this written down. We've been trying to get the philosophy around what makes good observability, the why. I still think there can be help here because I still think we can get that information distilled. We can find a way to get it to you. We can have a guide. Like this is where starting to use some AI tooling, where we could actually have a guide go through and say, look, read these guides for what makes good data, and tell me if my data is good. Where Weaver helps is you start writing down what your data is and what it means, and you can enforce that it's consistent in your ecosystem. So when it comes to bad telemetry, what this will give you is it starts to get rid of all of the like little annoying bugs, right? It starts to get rid of the fact that, I'm using uh, uh, developer X decided to use library Y, and they're the only one in the entire company that does that. And so now my dashboard doesn't work. And if I want to make a query that like grabs data from A and from that weird library at the same time, it's really inefficient, or I just forget to do it. And so that thing's invisible and then it crashes and doesn't get alert. Those are the things that Weaver's going to solve. It's going to bring some sanity and clarity there. And hopefully it makes it, one of the goals is to make it so trivial to add instrumentation that you're willing to do it. And that friction between the operator team and the developer team to get new signals should be as low as possible. What
That's
it
very
does,
cool.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No, you can finish.
Uh, well, I do talk a lot, so you can always feel free to interject questions.
No. Yeah, so perhaps one thing is people who are watching, you can write your questions here. We have a couple of more minutes. So if you have questions to Josh, take this opportunity, right? And write the questions here. Um, Josh, I do have another question, which is, so those are good things. Like I can specify, and I think if I can take one concrete example that I've seen as bad telemetry, like I know that there is a specific company that they say you should not collect the URL query. This is very dangerous. Only very special teams going through a special process are allowed to collect URL query. So this is one of the things that companies end up knowing, and they adopt a policy. They can implement that using Weaver, probably with a live check, right? So companies would then be able to deploy a live check with that rule, and then whenever there is a violation of the rule, they get notified. How are those rules defined?
Yeah. So we have a policy in Weaver that every aspect of Weaver, as much as is reasonable, should be something you can extend as a user, and that we can have a default. So uh, the policies right now we're actually using, if you're familiar with the Open Policy Agent, Open Policy Agent supports two languages. One is Cell and one is Rego. For Weaver, we actually, a lot of our policies are a little too complicated for Cell only. So we only support Rego as a policy engine. But you can define a Rego policy where you can say, I'm going to look for uh, a problem on a packet of data that came in, and I will create what we call a policy finding. A policy finding can be a violation, it can be a warning, or it can be informational. And so you're able to put whatever you want in a policy finding. You have to give it a human readable message, but you can actually put arbitrary JSON context in there if you want. And then you can feed those findings. By default, what Weaver will do is if it gets anything that is a warning or a violation, it will error. So you can make sure that Weaver will actually work in your integration test and error out if there's a problem. You can also fire that data via OTLP to some other system that will track and fire alerts. Like if you wanted to have this be a not in the middle of an integration test thing, if you wanted to have it be more live, you can take those violations, fire them somewhere, create alerts on them, send those alerts to the person who violated it and say, go fix it. Or one thing that we do internally, we love this for some reason. We will, instead of firing an alert, we'll open a bug in our bug ticket system against you and say, hey, this is really important. Go fix this to track it, right? You can do stuff like that if you wanted to. But this is effectively it's a Rego policy, and you get access to both the closest definition that Weaver detected the telemetry should look like. You get access to the actual OTLP that it saw, and you're able to do whatever you want from there in terms of policies if you want to customize. Again, we have out of the box ones that will just check for basic violations, basic things, make sure that at least there's some base level of consistency. But if you wanted to go further, if you wanted to look for PII, if you wanted to check for, if you had a way of checking for credit card numbers and you wanted to put it in there and it's something you can do in Rego, absolutely go for it.
That's very, very cool. Josh, I think this is one thing that I wanted to mention is you mentioned a talk that you're given, and I think you were talking about observability by design that you delivered last year in London, perhaps?
Yes, that was in London. Yep.
Yeah. For those who didn't watch, I do recommend you watching. Quite a few people that I know, including myself, we came out of that session saying, "Oh, so that's what Weaver is about." And I think this is, I think Weaver is a very promising tool. It can deliver already a few things. I think the documentation can be a little bit better, but it's understandable because there are so many things right there right now under Weaver. But I think the message here to the people outside is you can get started with Weaver. The basic primitives, the basic things are there. You can use it. It is a little bit complex, so it takes some time to ramp up, but I think it is worth it. And I think for those who care about governance of their telemetry, Weaver is a very promising tool, and you should keep watching in this space.
Just to add to that, if you're right now, as you said, our documentation could be better, and we're aware of that, and it's been rapidly improving since that talk in London. It's improved a lot. Get involved if you're interested, and give us feedback. Like the more you give us feedback of what to fix, a lot of the improvements in Weaver have come from people actually trying it, using it in anger, running into issues, and that's where we're dedicating our time here. So there's one foundational thing we're trying to fix, which is we think the syntax of the YAML we inherited from that Python script so long ago, and we've been making little kind of piecewise fixes. And we got to the point where we said, you know what, there's going to be a big bump. We're going to go to a V2 of that syntax to really nail that one down. And that syntax is coming with the whole stable by default open telemetry stuff. So that, if you wanted to wait for that to land, I get it. But I think outside of that, your feedback is what drives Weaver. You trying it as a person, as a company, putting it into practice, using it, that's where we're prioritizing all of our efforts going forward. So if you need it for something, come to the ecosystem, tell us what you need, and let's start fixing that together. And I do want to give a shout out to the Prometheus ecosystem, who has tried to start adopting Weaver. There's some PRs right now where they're actually using Weaver to do the metrics that Prometheus itself generates. And they've contributed some really cool stuff back to us, both in ideas, in bug tickets, and in code. So like, just come be a part of the ecosystem. We're happy to have you.
And if people have questions, where should they ask?
I believe CNCF Slack is the best place to get very fast, rapid interest from the ecosystem. And if that is inconvenient or hard for you, feel free to open a GitHub issue and ask your question, or say, hey, I wanted to try this, and we'll try to get you connected from there.
And if you are on the CNCF Slack, that's the OTel-Weaver channel. So you can join the channel and ask for questions there. Josh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here. I hope that people watching now have a better understanding about what is Weaver, and if they are like me, they are going to try Weaver soon. So thank you very much for sharing all about Weaver here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and just thank you for what you do in this ecosystem, Jurazi. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. And folks, next week we are having Doses de Telemetria in Portuguese. So next week you're going to hear me in Portuguese, and we're having a special topic. And again, we have quite a few events lined up next week. OTel Night here in Berlin, and then a afternoon with Open Telemetry, tarde de Open Telemetry in São Paulo at the beginning of March, and then KubeCon in Amsterdam. See you around.